reason I started teaching this class, to give you some background, is some of you probably know my husband, Joseph Klosick. He and I are a buyers, I'm sorry, he and I are a real estate team, and he works only with listings and I work only with buyers. And that became the case. I want to say it was 2010. So when I first got started in 2008, excuse me, I worked only on my own. I did not have, Joseph was not my partner. He was a team leader and he was a broker, but he wasn't in the sales. So 2 years I worked. Everybody mute yourselves, please. So when I got my real estate license and we got married, I was just working both sides of the table, right? And then in 2010, Joseph was like, I've really kind of gotten a taste for wanting to get back into sales. So that's when we became a husband-wife team. And we decided that I would work only with buyers and he would work only with sellers. And so I took Ignite. I did all of these classes. I did everything that you guys are probably doing. And the buyer presentation class, or it's Ignite session 7. I don't know what they're calling Ignite now. It might be like, I forget the name. It's got a little bit different name, but it's the same thing. It's like 16 sessions, I think. But number 7 is Win with Buyers. And in the session called Win with Buyers through Ignite, which you have a link to getting to their toolkit, they tell you, all right, there's a buyer lead sheet, there's a buyer needs analysis, and there's a buyer presentation. So I feel like as real estate agents and as a company, we spend a lot of time focused on listings. And so if you want to be a really strong listing agent, the faster you can get your buyers under contract, you can get back to lead generating for your listings. So no matter which side of the table you want to really focus on, you need to have a really good buyer system for both, because you need to be professional. You need to be able to know how to run a buyer process and do it really well so that your buyers aren't stressed all the way through. And then also just have the same amount of attention to that you do listings, because buyers require a lot more hands-on, a lot more time. And so if you have a good system, you won't get totally discombobulated, because when your career starts to pick up more and more, you could get to the point where I would be working with 5 different buyers in 1 month. And I needed to have a system so that I knew where I was with each of them, because my memory could not do it all, right? You can't do everything in your head. You need to have kind of a tracking system. So if you'll pull up, it's from the email I sent this morning, the buyer agent list of steps. I'm just going to walk you through that. And we're going to talk a little bit about what this is. This is basically my system. When a couple of years ago, Joseph and I finally put everything that we do, we finally put it in an operations manual. So our logo is Salt Marsh Properties. And like I have a little logo and everything. So Salt Marsh Properties, we created an operations manual so that as we started to hire, or if anything happened to us, someone would know how to run our team. So that's why this was put on paper. I had to get it out of my little world and put it on paper that I could share with people. So to the benefit of you guys, you now have somewhat of a checklist. So let's go to the top of the page where it's basically pre-consultation, pre-home tour. So this is how I run my business from the beginning to end. The first step is, of course, you get the buyer information. So if you are a lead generator on the internet, if you are, Facebook, if you are buying leads, whatever, or if you get referrals from other agents, no matter what, there's a first step, and that is that you get the buyer's information, right? So what the first thing that you do, you get their information. And if you got that referral from another agent or a past client, then you send a thank you note to that referrer. That's your first step. Then you have on this checklist, I created the ability for you to be able to say, yep, I've done it. And this is the date I did it. The reason it's important about these dates is because we talk a lot in business planning about tracking your ability to convert your listings, and how well you're doing with that, right? So if you start tracking your buyer leads, if you get a bunch of leads in October, let's say, and you're not showing property until January, or you're not even showing them property, what that's saying potentially is that, you know, your conversion is slower, or you're getting a lot of C buyers. You're not getting right there, like need to buy in the next 30 days. And as a real estate agent, you need to know how to lead generate for right now buyers and then also down the road buyers. So having the date on your tracking system just allows you to be able to look back at the end of every year and say, how did I do with my buyers? Like when I got referred to them, how quickly did we start looking at properties, and can I fix that? Can I make that a shorter timeline if the problem is with you, versus some people just don't buy for a year? That's not a big deal. All right, so you send the note to the referrer. Okay, then your next step is you're going to reach out to that lead twice. Now, the first thing I do is I email them first the documents that I'm actually going to teach you about today. All my buyers from the very first touch from me, they get a couple of attachments, and those attachments are the buyer. This is what I call them in my folder. The buyer questionnaire, which in the attachment I've given you, you see my notes where I call it the buyer questionnaire. It's the buyer needs analysis. Okay, I just liked saying Saltmarsh Properties buyer questionnaire better than buyer needs analysis. So anyway, I send them a buyer questionnaire. I send them a generic Charleston map that I just downloaded from, you know, the internet. That's a bird's eye view. I wanted it to be very basic and just show, you know, Mount Pleasant over here, Johns Island over here, Somerville up here. I send them my vendor list. Again, it has my logo and has a little bit of description of here's who the Saltmarsh Properties team will use. If you don't have a great list of vendors yet, that's okay. You at least have two. You have Movement Mortgage and Butler and College. But part of your job as a real estate agent is establishing a relationship with vendors in the area, and getting into that relationship where you're saying, hey, I'm going to send your information to buyer referrals. What I'd like is to be able to call on you throughout the year. I don't have to be your only agent, but I'd like for you to think of me along with a couple of other agents. And I'm going to kind of hold you accountable to that, if you're okay with that, because if I send you business, I'd love to just get maybe one or two referrals from you throughout the year. So that's kind of how you have that conversation. I send them locals guide, which I just took some time and basically sat down and went mentally, like from everywhere, like Old Village and the town center, and then Avondale and the James Island area right over there at Harborview. Then I like thought about Somerville proper, Nexton, and I basically created a bunch of links to marinas, parks, the farmers market. So it was just like you had to sit there and just do maybe research for a couple of hours and copy and paste the links, the Chamber of Commerce stuff, whatever. So I have a locals guide that I send to people as well. Then I send them a bundled PDF version of all of our contracts. And that is downloaded, you know, from the zip forms, just pull, or from, you know, command, just pull them off, save them, bundle them. And I share with them the buyer's agency agreement, as well as the South Carolina contract, as well as the brochure. I attach the guide. So one of the documents we're learning today is called the buyer presentation. It used to be called the buyer's guide. I think it even says it's labeled buyer presentation, but on the title of the page it says buyer's guide. So that email, all right, so I just went through all of my attachments. A couple of those you're going to need to do on your own. Some of this is your own work. However, the buyer questionnaire and the buyer guide, those are the two things that Ignite kind of gives to you. And what I do in this class is help you streamline it in a way where only the most important, in my experience, the most important questions stay on those documents. Because what I learned is there was too much information, too many questions, and it was too long. It was overwhelming. And over the years, I learned what buyers really cared about and just started removing some of the questions that never meant anything. So that's what we're going to do today. So in my first email my first touch to a buyer is the email, and it's a canned email. So basically I woke up one day and I was like, well, I'm kind of an idiot because I start the same email over and over and over. What I need to do is create a template of all the emails I send over and over. And that became my system. So now I've moved it now to a Google Doc, but it was just on a Word document. And basically I have them labeled as buyer, email one, and you'll see my label, buyer first email intro. I'm real creative with the names. And then every email following is called buyer email 2, 3, 4, and it kind of describes it. And it goes all the way through the transaction until the very end and 5 days post closing. So all in all, I have like 13 emails that go out to all my buyers. And I'm also emailing the lender and the attorney. That system is what I'm going to share with you guys, because part of today's class is you have homework. Your homework is, once we've gone through all the edits, you're going to email to me the 2 documents that I consider the most vital to be a buyer's agent. And once I review those documents and I feel good about you releasing those to the public, because I help with spelling or spacing or grammar or whatever. Once I know you have that packet, I then share with you my canned emails, because the canned emails reference these documents. And I don't want you to have the system if you're not going to start it properly. So I'm kind of like a hardcore teacher in that regard. All right, so back to my system. I send them an email, and then I will wait an hour, 2 hours, and then I will call them. I do not call first. And because the reason I don't do that is because I learned that if you call them first, and you have not, I learned over time how to stay in control. The most important thing with a buyer is to stay in control and to establish that they're going to work in your system. You're not like, hey, let's do this together. Who's going to do what? So I realized that when I used to call without a system, they'd answer the phone, and all of a sudden I'm scrambling to find a piece of paper to write down all this information. If I were meeting them with a consultant, I had not sent them anything. I'm basically catching all their stuff at their pace, and I'm not in control. So I started thinking about that, and I was like, no one actually really knows my job. They don't know how busy I am. So I realized me sending them an email first, while I know I could call them, it actually establishes the system that I keep them in. So I just stopped calling first out of preference. So then when I would send them an email, I have all these great attachments, then I would call them. And my immediate script was, hey, this is Lynn Klosick. I only have a minute. I am in between appointments. I could be sitting there eating bonbons, but they don't need to know that. I say, I'm in between appointments. I only have a few minutes. However, I wanted to go ahead and establish a connection, introduce myself. I wanted to make sure you knew that I was a live person. And if you will, go check your email. I have sent you an email with a bunch of buyer resources and a little bit of a description of how our consultation is going to go. If you will, go take a look at that. And in the email, it asks them for like a time to consult. So basically my phone call is to establish you received my email. We're going to set a consultation, but it's not right now. But I build rapport, I'm nice, and I explain to them, and they're like, oh, that's great. I'm so glad. Thank you. So like, yeah, I'll, look at everything, then I'll email you back. So again, you want to have those 2 as your steps, and then you want to have when you send them and the dates, because if you see a big lag time between sending an email and calling, that's not a great system. You need to be at least wait an hour or 2, but you need to have hit them both on the same day. And if you get their voicemail, you just leave the same message. Hey, I've sent you an email. I'm showing property today, so it may be hard to get a hold of, but maybe if it's easier for you, you can read that tonight. Go over it with your family, whomever you're buying with, and then let's talk tomorrow or whatever. And what I found, depending on the personality type of, based on the personality type of the buyer, they might be like, great, this is awesome. I don't even want to talk to you till I filled it out. Let me fill it out and send it back to you, kind of thing. I learned sending that was a game changer for my business. And here's the most important thing. The buyer questionnaire has to be editable. I did it on a Word document. I like it editable because when you send to people a PDF version, which now people can work in PDFs. So every time I say that, I remember people can write on a PDF now, but let me just get the concept out. If you give them something that they can type inside of, they will send it back to you with the answers versus a random email with 2 or 3 paragraphs where they might have forgotten a couple of the questions. So I made sure that they could type inside the document, and then I can also print that out and take it with me on showings, because obviously buyers can walk through a house and all of a sudden be like, well, no, I guess I don't really like blah, blah, blah. So you'll have your little buyer questionnaire with you and be like, okay, so I'll make a change of that. So you have somewhere to take notes and it's all about them. It's still sticking to their original plan, right? All right, so second thing is your buyer's agent sets the appointment to conduct the buyer consultation to go over everything. You want to put that on your calendar, and then you want to communicate the details of the time and the location and everything. Of course, the best case scenario is in front of people. That's changed a lot this year. I did a ton of my buyer consultations over the phone because so many of mine are coming from other areas that even before 2020, half of my consultations were just a phone appointment. So that is totally fine before we even had the Zoom thing. So being able to look at someone isn't necessary, but if they love it, then go for it. All right, so then the next thing is you conduct the buyer consultation. We just talked about that. What you do is you basically go over the buyer questionnaire. If they don't fill it out prior to your consultation, that's okay. You just go through it question by question and you make sure that you go 3 deep and ask questions, right? Then you also ask them, hey, part of the questionnaire, which we'll go over in a minute, it asks them really important questions like, have you ever bought a house in South Carolina? Once you know those answers, you kind of know how long you need to stay on the buyer guide. Because if they're like, yeah, this is our third house, then you're like, okay, so I don't need to tell you how it works in South Carolina. So it's just like the questionnaire is going to, or the consultation using the questionnaire is going to dictate how you kind of tweak it to them. Okay, so you conclude your consultation. That typically rarely takes more than half an hour. If the person has a lot of questions, it can be an hour. So I always say, like the email that I send to them says, a lot, maybe an hour for this, just in case we have a lot of questions, so I'm making sure they know not to feel super crunched because it's going to be a thorough consultation. All right, then I send 4 emails within 24 hours of that consultation. Now you'll notice that there's some checks, like you want to check off that you've completed the consultation, that you've put the dates on your calendar, that your agent homework has been completed and your client homework is completed, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the buyer sends 4 emails within 24 hours of consultation. The first one is labeled buyer second email post consult. Again, it's basically a canned email saying, okay, we just consulted. Thank you for your time. This was great. Here's how it's going to work. And then that email itself is tweaked pertaining to that specific buyer. So I go get the information, I copy the whole thing, I move it over into an email, right? And then as I go through it, there are parts of it that I'm going to have to delete and manipulate because I have a lot of different options depending on if they're local, if they're not local. So that email goes out to them, and depending on the consultation, if they are looking soon, then another email might be, okay, here are some houses right now that are active. Go take a look. Give me your thoughts. You might, obviously you want to talk about the buyer agency. The caveat there is if they are buying for a year, I don't require a buyer agency at that consultation. I just leave it alone, but I explain to them how it works. If they're buying soon, then I will say, are you comfortable signing this? Do you understand what it is? Do you want to talk about it? And then you need to be able to describe it to them in a way that's non-threatening. And I always just describe it like, it's basically an agreement that we're just going to trust each other, be loyal to each other, do work for one another. However, if for any reason it's just not a good fit, we can get out of this relationship. And I often say things like that doesn't happen very often to me. I mean, I'm a good buyer's agent. You're going to be in good hands. But if that were to happen, I just want you to know I'm not going to stalk you. You can fire me and I can fire you. So you need to not be scared of that conversation. And then if they're like, I still don't want to sign it, then in Ignite, you have classes where we talk about those kind of objections. They're great scripts to get around that. And they're also great scripts to say, well, then we're not a good fit piece. So like you have a couple ways to do that, but the most important is always push for a buyer agency. Because if you do have a difficult personality about that and they're distrustful and they've had a bad experience, you should want to redeem it and do whatever you can to fix whatever some chump agent did to them. And then secondly, you now understand the personality type you're working with. It just educates you on how to manage it. That's the best way you can deal with a buyer, is just understand where they're coming from. Okay. Then the fourth email is sending it to your referring party, if you have one, your past client or an agent, to say, I just consulted with Joe. It was great. This is what we're doing. He's not buying until 2021, but we're going to stay in touch. So you, again, your system is not only with the buyer, but it's also with your command, your opportunities, making sure everyone's aware. Okay. Assuming your buyer is buying something soon, then your next step is to schedule looking at homes. And when I talked about buyer homework and agent homework, some of that falls into this. Like basically that email says, okay, great. Now I need to get from you your first dates, your first dates to go look at property. I need to know if you have a pre-approval. Let's say when you consulted, they said, no, we don't yet, but we're going to get one. That's part of their homework. And you don't want to do anything until they've completed their homework. And that's a hard thing to do, but it's so important. I had like one example is, sorry, talking makes my throat get dry. I was working with a military guy, and his fiance was involved at the time, but he like literally got this last minute. This was a couple years ago, and he had to go with Trump. He was part of like Trump's whatever it's called, Secret Service thing. So he had to, fly and go with Trump. So I had homework for him. I'd sent him that email that said, great consulting. Here are our next steps. Here's what I need from you before we can do anything. He leaves the country, and his fiance starts blowing me up because his property comes up and she really wants to see it. And I was like, okay, well, wait a minute, I can do that. And then I started thinking, and I was like, wait a minute, no, this is like training 101. I was like, I need to know if I've even gotten his pre-approval. So I went back and I could track where I sent him an email, but I had nothing back from him. And so I was like, no, like I've got to find a nice way to tell her that I'm not doing this, because actually she's not the buyer, he is. So I basically was like, hey, this is how it's going to work. I need a pre-approval from him. I don't even know his dates of, so I was able to be like, no, I'm not going to be a Pop-Tart agent and jump up and immediately go race up, to Somerville. And for me, that's like an hour drive. So I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to stay in my system and let the chips fall where they fall, because the minute you let a buyer start changing your system, it's so tempting because you want to get them under contract. But if you're following your system that I am going to help you put together, and that system is good and professional, sticking to it is the wisest thing you can do. And if you lose an agent or a client or two in the grand scheme of things, that's okay, because you're going to get so good and so confident in your system, you're going to eventually be able to say, most buyers, 98% of buyers want to work in my system. The 2% who don't are going to be probably difficult. I don't know that I want to work with them anyway. So that can help your mentality a little bit to just be really confident about your system. Okay. Before you walk through houses, you want to try to have the buyer agency, and then you want to have your pre-approval. And the way I say the script for that is, if, I have had clients who thought they did something online. They went to, some of these online mortgage quotes, and they thought they could afford 275. But when we finally spoke to an actual bank, based on some of the portfolio that they didn't realize they didn't enter, they really could only afford 250. And so we looked at houses that they could no longer afford, and it was devastating to them. So I'm going to prevent that for you. So I need to have someone truly do your numbers. And again, you say it in a way where it's like, in case you didn't know, this is kind of how it has to happen. And most of the time, they're so busy reading internet and fly by the seat of the pants that they're not going to push back. They're going to be like, oh, that's great. You are the expert. That's why I'm talking to you. Good. Thank you for saving me that time and energy. So it's not like you're being the bad guy. You're just saying, let my expertise dictate. Are you comfortable with that? And they'll either say, I don't want to do that, or that's something that's going to go work for me. And then that you just got to keep digging down to figure out your personality type. Okay, and then the next page is obviously like showing homes and a contract to close. We're not going to get into that today. That's not what today is about. I see you. Hold on 2 seconds and then I'll answer. But this whole thing is now your checklist for you to keep and use however you want. And again, when you send me your homework, you're going to get access to all these emails and then you'll just copy and paste like I do. Okay. What was your question?
Everything you were going on just now, I was trying to find it, and I've got the two printed out that you sent in the email, but then I also pulled up the KW Connect link and just wanted to see where you're at right now, if you didn't mind. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So if you go to my original email that I sent this morning, that was like, hey, if y'all will RSVP, I'm going to send you some stuff. It was attached to that. It's a PDF. And luckily, you just now have a checklist. I was explaining the method of the madness. You didn't need to make any edits to that. So now you just can download it, use it as your own if you like it, or, take parts of it. So that right there, guys, is basically the overview of my buyer process from start to finish. That's my checklist. I have all that stuff that I do for each and every one. Now we're going to switch to the buyer needs analysis, the one that it says, I call it the questionnaire. Now, this is where you're going to follow along with me and either make edits on what you already have, or you just can do the edits later because I've shared with you my notes. But we're going to talk about why I feel things are important, why I have removed things. And I want you to just learn from me and then take from it what you can. So with any and all questions, do what he did. Like, you can raise your hand, I can see you. Or if you want to chat, I do have the chat thing up so I can see it. And I'll do the same thing. I'll say, let me finish my thought, then we'll get to it. If I'm on a roll and I don't want to stop, I'll just say, hey, write it down really quickly. And then I'll stop and we'll answer some questions and pause, if that makes sense. I like it interactive, so definitely do that. Okay, first page. You see out the words your brand under KW Keller Williams. So I think it's very important to make sure that on this document, and again, if you download it from Ignite, or you could download it from mine and you were able to edit it, you are able to add your phone number, your email, your picture, your logo, whatever. What you have to remember is if this document gets forwarded to anyone, you want it to have your contact info, because two friends are talking, they're both buying a house in the same, are looking to buy a house in two separate towns. They might be like, look at what my agent gave me. You never know how that could turn into good business for you. So make sure your information is all over the document. I both put it at the top, and then I have in very small print everything down at the bottom, and a footer as well. Okay, so the first page is just, mine says the Salt Marsh Properties Buyer Questionnaire. That's what mine says. Second page, which starts with the words getting started. Okay, up at the top, you see I have note, category, spacing, font. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here with that note is I deleted a lot of the spacing because the document itself was editable. I didn't leave a lot of space for them to fill it out because it's not a PDF. So I wanted the document, this 8 pages, to be as short as possible. And I think my buyer questionnaire is now only 4 pages. A big part of that was moving things up on the page, getting them closer together, decreasing the font, taking out some of the headings. You do what you want to do. I just am saying buyers will fill it out if it's a more manageable document. If it's too long and overwhelming, they'll be like, well, I'll just talk to her about it. And then it kind of defeats the purpose. I get the majority of my buyer questionnaires, I get back filled out, and it's like it's done the heavy lifting. So my advice is make it more succinct on every page. All right, first set of notes, obviously, like they took up half a page for name, phone, email. All that has to say is one line. Who is the name of everyone and what's your preferred method of contacting? That became one document for me. One sentence for me. So again, just telling you don't waste space. It's going to make the document too long. The reason it's important to say preferred method of contacting, and here are some things that you might want to jot down because I'm going to give you scripts and some ideas. So if you get your questionnaire back, or you are doing this live with someone and they're answering them to you, and they say, I prefer texting, then this gives you an idea of the way I look at it, the way I say it is every buyer's agent has a toolkit. And in the toolkit, there are documents and scripts and intelligence and wisdom and discernment. So you got to reach in that toolkit now and come up with your script for why texting is not going to be how you run your business. And you've got to do it in a way where your buyer doesn't feel like you're saying no to them. So I'll tell you how I handle it. So if I get back in there, like we prefer texting, I'll say, hey, I noticed that, because when I'm consulting with him, I say, okay, let's start with the first question, right? I say, I noticed that you said your preferred method is texting. I said, let me talk about that just a little bit. So I'm a buyer's agent. I work only with buyers. So I'm in my car a lot. Now, if you're not just a buyer's agent, you can still say, I work with a lot of buyers. Okay. So I work with a lot of buyers. I'm in my car a lot. And I'm with clients very often, just kind of hands-on. And I first don't really love communicating with people when I'm with clients. So there may be a chance that if you were to text me, you might not hear back from me. So I want us to go ahead and talk about that, because my goal is to make sure you don't think I'm ignoring you. It's just kind of the pitfall of my business is that if I'm with clients, I don't communicate with others. Then I'll say, because I'm driving a lot, obviously texting is not how I'm going to communicate. And more importantly, I might need my GPS. So if you were to text me something important and I had to dismiss it because I need to get back to my GPS, there's a chance that could slip through the cracks. So what I say to them is, if you text me, but it's really important, I would ask you to also email me, because my email is my running to-do list. I don't delete or move anything until I've addressed the question or answered it. And I said, so like you might, I will say to them, I might text you like I'm on my way if we're meeting up, but the majority of my real estate business is done on email. And I'll say, is that okay if I don't necessarily always text you back, but move it to email? And so I've asked them to weigh in on that. And they're like, oh yeah. And so I've established the expectations. I've explained to them I will not be texting back and that most of it will get back on email. So now they understand how I work. I've done it in a way that's like, hey, this is just better for you, because then I'm not going to forget anything. So often when I still will receive text from them, if they ask me a real estate question, I'll say, hey, let's move this to email, or when can you talk? It's too much to text. So I still remain in control and I do not let them change me, but I'm nice about it. Also, if they send me a text and I know that it's like, hey, where's the so-and-so again? Like, the phone number of the whatever, I will write back and say, hey, I'm with a client. Can you shoot me this in an email so I don't lose it? So I am constantly, like they're 5-year-olds, I'm constantly saying, hey, I appreciate you texting. I'm still going to email you. So that's a way for you to kind of make sure that you are confident that you always move it back to something you can keep and save in a file, because the subtext of that you don't share with your clients is that, you can't go back 2 years on your text, but you can with email. So if anything were to come up in court, if there was any kind of like residual issue once you close, you've got a file of emails. I've had to go to court one time and the judge was like, do you have documentation of this conversation? I was like, absolutely. So I printed all the emails out with the dates and the stamps, time stamps. And he was like, yeah, this is kind of bogus. Like this agent just didn't really do a very good job. I'm throwing the case out. So that even more taught me that I will never text about things. So when even an agent texts me about stuff, I'll go on email and say, per your text, this is what you asked of me, and here's my response. So just word to the wise, do not conduct real estate business on text. Keep it to just, I'll be there in a few minutes and I love the house. Jumping down. So I've struck that first bullet because obviously we just covered that. You don't need to ask it again. What is prompting your move? I like that question. Keep that one. Then the third bullet says, the original says, when do you need to be in your new home? And I said, it needs to say, when do you need to move into your new home? I like to use that specific verb because what that did is it changed the answer from spring of 2021 to March 30th of 2021, because then I can say, okay, backing out of that, if we do a 45-day grace period for your loan and you have to be moving in March 30th, we technically don't need to be under contract until February 15th. And so I'll say, so February 15th is our drop date. So we need to start looking probably in December and January. And so what it does is it teaches your clients spring is not that far away, not if you're getting a loan and not if you want to take some time with low inventory to look at properties. So that's an important way to tweak that question. All right. The next bullet, are you pre-approved for a mortgage? I plus that question. It's all together in one line. My extra questions are, do you know the difference between closing cost and down payment? And be prepared to discuss having a low mortgage or closing cost assistance. So basically that question is asking them stuff, and then it's a platform for discussion. It's a platform for education. So if they write back and they're like, yes, I understand, I still would say in the consultation, all right, so you say you understand. So you have everything ready to go for your your down payment. That's separate from the closing cost. You understand that? And I will start to set the buyer's expectations with that question and say things like, my job as your real estate agent is to get you a really low asking price or sales price and also get all of your closing costs covered. That would be ideal. That's not necessarily a win-win for the seller. I'm sure you can see that. So what we have to already start talking about, you and me, buyer and agent, is if you're cash heavy, then you might say, I got my closing costs covered, but I really want to get that mortgage low. So that may be your focus. You also may say, I only have about $5,000 in the bank after I pay my down payment. I need some assistance because I might want to redo the kitchen. So then the buyer and I are discussing the fact, and we're setting expectations that he's going to have to compromise somewhere, but it's in a very subtle manner, because I'm basically saying any and all scenarios really aren't determined until we find the house, but this is typically how it goes. And at that point, I give them the opportunity to kind of be able to share with me, I don't even know what you're talking about, or that stresses me out, or I have a gift, I'm getting a gift from my parents. And then it's like, okay, so then we have to work through, so who's your mortgage officer? Because that can be tricky. Let's make sure. So it just puts you constantly in a place of expertise. And then if they are really savvy buyers, great, then they're organized. But you want to make sure you know one way or the other. Okay. Next bullet. When I ask people what their price range is, I think it's very important to say, and where did you get that information? And do you know the monthly breakdown of that? Wonder why I have the word credit. Hold on, let me think. Credit. I'll come back to that. But you want to ask them, because if it's like, I'm kind of sneaky, because if they're like, yes, I know my price range, but no, I don't know my monthly breakdown. To me, they haven't received everything from someone. And I feel like that's kind of risky. So I'll say, all right, well, we need to, maybe that credit thing is if they ask you like, well, if someone runs my credit or whatever, am I going to get dinged? Jane, I just saw what you wrote. Yeah, I think that was it. It's like I basically was saying you're not going to get dinged if you're looking at home research. Like whoever this Oz guy is who decides our credit score, if you're hitting up like Best Buy and Target for credit cards, that's one thing. But if they see you're doing research on a home, it really doesn't screw with your credit. And you want to tell your buyers that up to 3 different loan officers could look at their house, look at their information, and it wouldn't be detrimental. But yeah, like maybe part of that is just you're having that education with them. All right, so that last question, if we've found a home today, I don't have that in my questionnaire because if they're reading this for the first time, I'm clearly not going out to look at them. They might be in Ohio reading my questionnaire. So I delete that question from this document. It does not mean it's not a good question. It just means that for the purpose of saving space on the document, I get rid of it. And then what you could do right now as you're taking this class, you could make a note to say, have this somewhere, but just not on the questionnaire, right? So you get to create your own little world. You notice I did, again, reminding you to brand yourself at the bottom. All right, let's flip to the next page. You're gonna see obviously a lot of edits here. And let me, oh, someone wrote something. Wouldn't the pre-approval be the range they have to work with? The range. If you wanna, why don't you unmute yourself and explain your question?
Yes, the reason why I asked that, because let's say if somebody has a pre-approval of, let's say 250, then of course I'll work with that, with homes that for that list price of 250 or maybe 255, depending upon how we can negotiate. But I wouldn't. If they want to see a home that's 275 or 280, they say, well, can you negotiate down to 250? So that's why I was saying, with that pre-approval, really put them maybe within a maybe a possibly, but then stretching it $10,000.
I wouldn't go over a $10,000 bracket. And I'll say to them, I'll say in this market right now, there's not a heavy amount of negotiating. And I'm okay with us looking just a little bit over your fence. But what I'll say is that 250 a hard stop or like, because if 250 is a hard stop, we might need to go 255 if you're going to ask closing cost. So all of that dialogue happens with that question. But the monthly breakdown, okay, I realize I didn't say this. What's important about asking the monthly breakdown is, let's say someone had amazing credit and could buy, they said you can buy a house up to 700,000, but they have really intense retirement goals. So they don't want to spend more than $2,500 a month. Then that's your opportunity to say to them, okay, so we're not looking up to 700 now. So like, once you know your breakdown, you might be like, that's over my budget, even though I can't afford it. So that's why it's important about that monthly breakdown, for them to know that if they are on a stricter budget, just because they have good credit, it could bump them to something that they are now, underwater, or they're stressed every month paying. And that's part of that conversation. Okay, so we're gonna jump to the next page, if we're good. So again, if you'll notice the headings, there's the heading lifestyle, then there's the heading location. I deleted some of these headings on my questionnaire just because I grouped them. How I like to look at things is like succinct grouping. And I just used who, what, when, where, and why. Those were my headings. And I lumped everything that had to do with who under who. I didn't necessarily say the house or the family, because part of the financing, there are a lot of questions about financing that goes under how for me. So just be thinking of that. I'm just throwing some ideas out, not necessarily telling you, but if you can minimize your headings, you're saving space. All right. I struck the first bullet because it doesn't matter who's living in the home. It really doesn't matter. So that don't waste the space. I like the second question because what I learned is a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I'm moving to the beach. I probably have a lot of more guests than I did when I lived in, wherever they were. And so that's a good question for you to say, anyone you might visit. Because if they say, we just need 3 bedrooms, one for us and the kids. And I'm like, well, if you have a lot of us, if all of a sudden your parents are coming to town, they're like, oh yeah, we might need a 4th bedroom. So that helps them identify their needs. That's your job. Bullet number 3, that's not important. Let me say more clearly. Building rapport, this conversation is a good conversation, but I don't need, like, I'm a naturally social person. So, and they'll also tell you, like, what I've learned is buyers don't need to be handheld. Once you start giving them just a few questions, they're like a fire hydrant. They'll tell you everything. So I just saved space on this questionnaire because I don't need to know their lifestyle. I don't need to know what they enjoy doing at home. I need to figure out how to translate that into actual, hard things I can help them find. So that's why I just removed some of those questions. But a lot in the beginning, before I even start going over the consultation, I'll be like, so tell me about yourself. What's the deal? Why are you coming to Charleston? So they'll say stuff like, well, we love to golf and blah, blah, blah. So you don't necessarily have to have a question. Do you need for an office in the home? You don't need to. Some of these questions are struck because they're going to tell you you don't need to waste space. If they have needs for special needs, they're going to tell you you don't have to ask the question. The next bullet about do you have any pets? It's not important if they have pets. The important question is if you need a fence, can we put it in after closing? Because what I found in the beginning is with do you have any pets? I was getting answers like, yeah, we have 22 llamas and here are their names. And then nothing about how that applied to their houses. And so I thought, how do I make a smarter question? The other thing is they would say, yeah, we need a fence. Yeah, we need a fence. I realized by adding, can it be put in post closing, completely changed the search, because you hear a lot that people will say, I told my agent what I wanted, but they kept sending me the stuff I didn't want. So when I could say to them, so if you ask for a fence to be there, that's going to limit how many homes I'm going to be able to show you. Let's just find an HOA that allows a fence. And then it's like, oh yeah, that's perfect. And then we keep moving forward. I've now opened up their search where I just need a little bit of a yard, but I don't necessarily have to have a fence. If that, makes sense. Next one, not an important question. When people come to your home, what do you want them to say about you? Maybe I sound like a jerk, but this stuff is not how I build rapport. This is also not how I really give them a home. I also feel it's super, super important that if you spend too much time fluffing up this dream house, they're going to expect you to bring it to them. So some of these questions, I just thought, I don't necessarily want to make them think these questions are important because I'm going to do it for you, because most of this stuff doesn't exist in the homes they eventually really need. A buyer's footprint typically comes down to 5 things, and it's not where the athletic equipment is. So my years of experience have taught me just to streamline the questionnaire, and no one has ever felt it's not friendly and social. So don't let that scare you. Is there anything I should know about your lifestyle? No, I don't think you should ask anyone about their lifestyle. Location, tell me about your ideal location. I prefer, are you familiar with Charleston? And then what is your preferred area? Let's go ahead and drill down. Don't waste time on, what's your ideal? My ideal location is skiing in Vail, let's say. That's not buying a house though. So you just have to make it just a more common sense questionnaire. All right, what's your maximum commute time and distance? Obviously, I think that you need to give them points, like from work or from the beach or airport. That triggers them to think, oh yeah, a lot of people are moving here to get out of the big city. So they're like, yeah, I need to get closer to the airport. So if they're like, I'd love to be by the beach, but the most important is only a 10-minute drive to the airport, then that's my opportunity to say, okay, so good news and bad. We can get you near the airport. That means you're going to compromise on the beach proximity. Let's talk about that. Is that just a deal breaker or what? So again, you're constantly running through these questions and saying, how do you feel about that? Are you comfortable with that? Does that kind of disappoint you? Like, I am very comfortable with having people share with me exactly how it's making them feel, because that's a big part of it. And, in Ignite, they teach you about your unique value proposition. And I often explain to them, my buyers, I will say, prior to being in residential real estate, I did commercial real estate. And then prior to that, I worked for lawyers. So I'm like a slam dunk for you because I'm not going to be emotional and I'm going to be very organized based on my previous careers. And I'll say, you're allowed to be emotional, and I can't wait to see how emotional you get in a good way about the house. But the good news is this consultation is your and my business planning consultation. And if emotion starts to push you away from what we agree on is your business goal, I will get us back to that. I will make sure I always bring you back to making the decision on your business goals and not letting emotion take us too far out. Do I have your permission to do that? And they'll be like, yes, I need that because I'm going to be excited or I'm going to be nervous. I'm so glad you're going to be the one kind of in charge. So I'm, again, just creating a place for them to be like, oh, their shoulders drop. Someone's in charge, someone's a professional, and they're going to tell me what to do. And I'm so happy about that. Okay. Next one, what is your work address? Not relevant. If schools are, here's the deal, back to some of the pitfalls you need to watch as a buyer's agent or an agent. Here's one of my scripts with my buyers. I will say to them, okay, so here's how I work. I have a team of experts, and all of us have a very specific wheelhouse. You have me, the agent, you have a lawyer who's going to close us, you're going to have a loan officer, you're going to have an inspector, you're going to have possibly a contractor or whatever. I will say that group of people, we're all going to get you to the closing table very successfully and very smoothly. However, we all need to be careful and stay in our own little wheelhouses. So if you have a question and I know that it's someone else's expertise, I'll get you the answer, but I'm going to pull that person in and say, okay, they've asked me this question. I'm going to go straight to you with the answer. So again, I am setting proper expectations that I am not Chamber of Commerce. I am not a tour guide. And I'll explain to them, my job is to execute the contract terms exactly as you want them to be based on our consultation. And my job is to make sure that by the time we get through the contract dates, I have done everything we agreed to with the seller. Everything else after that, I'm going to stay involved. I'm going to keep pushing the ball up the court. However, I may not be in charge of that specific item. So I'll say once we've gotten through the contract terms, there could be the last 2 weeks of the whole process. That's going to be the loan officer and the lawyer. I'm just sitting there keeping everybody working and answering questions and pushing paperwork around. But at the end of the day, they're in charge of all that. So again, I'm setting proper expectations of how I am just the contract manager. So when you come to this question, are schools important? To me, that's too much of an open-ended question. I change it to, if schools are important, here are the links to all of your school districts. So I give them what they need to do the research for their family. And if someone is like, hey, I really want you to do this. Why do I have to look it up? Then you understand your personality. Then you reach back into your toolkit. You pull out the script that is a nice way of educating them that's their job for their family. And more importantly, what I will say is I work with so many different types of families, and I don't have my finger on the pulse of school districts because there's so many different types of schools and there's so many different needs for every child. I would probably do you a disservice because I don't know exactly your streamlined need for your family. So again, I think a master buyer's agent figures out how to make their life more simple, but then find a script that sounds like you're really protecting the buyer. And then you're a hero while you save yourself time and energy. No one ever pushes back on that. I think what we do incorrectly is we give the buyers this idea. Well, okay, so we're going to figure out your school districts and we're going to do this. If you just say, you're going to get to know the school districts, here's the information you need. Now you tell me which ones we're restricting. They're like, okay, I can work with that system. Giving them an open-ended, I'm just going to jump all over the place and do stuff for you. That can be dangerous. Thank you, Denise. All right, is there a particular view you are seeking and what else is important about your location? Again, what I've learned is they're going to fill this out and have all these different things. Like I must have a water view. And what's important there is you can go 3 deep and say things like, when you say water, do you mean like salt marsh or do you mean like one of those cute little ponds in a neighborhood where you just are looking out at water? Because those are 2 very different price points. Are you aware of that? So you can hear what they tell you and then drill down using common sense. And then you help come to a plan together that suits them. One thing that I would say is another script that I use when they're like, I do want salt. I'd like to be on the ocean and my price point is 300. What I'll say is, okay, so gosh, if you find that, let me know because I might try to buy it too. But then I'll say, okay, so what you've told me is you have a specific comfort zone for your family. And it looks like some of the areas you love in Charleston, those, and I make Charleston the bad guy. As of late, I will say things like, and as of late, I mean, like for the last 2 years, I'll be like, Charleston has lost its mind. What they charge for a house is kind of out there. And so I believe you can get more bang for your buck in other areas of town. So if they're like, we really loved, Mount Pleasant, or we want to be in the Old Village, or even Somerville proper. And I'm like, well, that's going to be tough because those are becoming less affordable. I make them not feel ostracized. Like, I hate when I hear people be like, yeah, you're not going to be able to afford that. Like, how much more insulting can you be? It's more like Charleston has lost its mind. I guess there's gold somewhere buried in these walls, but here I'm just here to help you identify where you're comfortable. Because your family's budget is going to a hard stop at 300. I want to make sure that you don't put your head down on the pillow and you're all of a sudden like, what have I done? So I'm going to be very firm with you about what is still inside your comfort zone. And I'm also going to encourage you to look in other areas because I want to get as much house for you as your money. And there are just some areas where it's such a high demand, people will just pay. And I always say, our job is to find the right fit between the buyer and the seller. And there are some buyers who are going to pay more than you will simply because they don't have enough sense, they don't have a good agent, or they're just so desperate that this is absolutely a non-negotiable that they're going to pay more than they wanted to. That's not you until you tell me it's you. So my goal is to find the right fit. And so if some other seller or some other buyer is going to pay a lot more than you will, then that's okay. We're going to find what keeps your family comfortable and happy with your purchase. And then I'll say, until you tell me otherwise, I'm going to keep you at this price point. So I'm pretty firm about the fact that, again, I'm your business advisor. This is what you've told me is comfortable. I'm not veering off of it until you tell me to. So I feel like being super human while you're consulting with them is very important, and saying, look, we all love to buy a beachfront house. Not all of us can or are willing to pay what it takes. So let's find something else. And you just love being in Charleston. And people will ask me, I can't believe how expensive it is. And I'm like, you're right. But didn't you tell me that you're looking for a lifestyle change from, let's say, the north, the winters? Somewhere you're going to have to just make peace with to have that lifestyle change. The house and the budget's just going to be a little bit different than it was where you are. So I never back down or feel bad about it. But I also stay very realistic with them because the fastest you will make someone unhappy is, bait and switch. So anyway, all right, the bottom of that page, I added 4 bullets because I think these are 4 very important questions to have. Everyone's on the internet, right? So you say, what addresses have you found up to this point? Send those to me. Let me go look and see if they're available. Okay, that's a very important question. Then you ask, do you have a current home to sell? And if you do you have an agent? Even if they're coming from another town, I've had a few people be like, no, I haven't even done the research. And I'm like, well, I have a great Keller Williams agent in that town. So there I am being a little greedy, saying, hey, maybe I can get 2 transactions or a referral fee and a transaction. It doesn't hurt to ask, right? Then you ask if they have a rental lease and maybe when that's up. And then if there are any other contingencies, let's discuss those now. So those are some of the questions that you do have to prompt them to think about. So there you go. Next page. Again, I just pointed out the heading. So make your headings whatever you want. All right. So a lot of these questions got struck because I wanted to make it super simple, because they ask the most important questions to me are, is this going to be your primary or secondary home? Is that going to be 4% and do you understand the difference between the 4% and 6%? Do you want new construction or resale? And do you want single family detached or single family attached? That basically takes up a quarter of the page, right? They'll answer those questions, and then that gives you an idea of what it is you have to tell them about. All right. This is what it means between 4 and 6%. You explain to them how it triples. New construction resale, instead of being like, what year? They'll either going to say, I don't want to deal with a house that isn't brand new because I don't feel like dealing with anything. So then you're like, okay, that's new construction. And then if they're like, hey, we don't really care, we just don't want it to be older than 10 years. They're going to answer those questions with the details you need. You don't need 8 questions to do it. Okay. The next bullet that I think is important, you see how I've struck the bullets. Approximately what, and I think the only thing to ask is, do you have a minimum or maximum square feet? And how I break that out for them is I say, let me explain. Sometimes we don't think about the square footage. We just think, well, this is the budget and it needs to have rooms, it needs to have a garage. However, let me ask you, what do you live in right now? And is your family about to kill each other? And they'll be like, oh, that's a good point. Yeah, we're in a 1,500 square foot house and we're growing out. So I'll be like, okay, so why don't we start our search around 1,800? So it's a little bit more than 15, but not huge. And then other people will be like, oh yeah, we're in 3,000 square feet and I don't want to clean it anymore. So I'll say, okay, so why don't we cap it at like 2,800? And then is there a minimum that you won't go beneath? So I feel like that really nails down the profile a little bit better. And what I'll say to them is, give me those hard stops. But if I do as I'm doing the research and looking for the homes, if I find that if I go like, if you said don't go below 1,800, but I see that if I go to 1,700, like 10 new houses pop up, I'll send you those and just say, let's go walk through your favorites, because it's really about how they use the square footage. So they're like, yeah, good point, blah, blah, blah. But you want to have some sort of a bracket. All right. All those next 3 questions, not really important. I always make sure that I ask if they want a screen porch, because a lot of people don't realize where they're moving, right? And I'll say things like, our state bird is the mosquito. So you're going to really want a screen porch. And they may live in a place where they don't have to have a screen porch. It's just an open air deck. It's my job to say, it's not that hard to find a screen porch here. Let's make that one of your deals. And that's, again, just something for you to give them more bang for their buck if possible. All right, what are you looking for in terms of a garage? I just basically asked, do you want a detached, number of bays? And then they may answer like not applicable, like they don't care, it doesn't matter. Or some will say it must be at least two bays to the garage. Oh, Mike, SFD is single family detached, SFA is single family attached. All right. Do you want to have a swimming pool or hot tub? Are you looking for any structures? So all that stuff, they're going to add, they're going to tell you, don't waste space. Now, this has become a really important question, the very last one. Are amenities important to you? And the reason I ask that now is I explain to them, I say, Charleston has now built a lot of homes. They've just grabbed pockets of land, thrown out 12 houses, and no amenities are ever going to come to that specific area. Is that a deal breaker for your family? Because that will actually narrow down a lot of homes in the Charleston area. So it just starts a conversation and they'll be like, all I really care about is maybe a neighborhood pool. And so I'll say, okay, so let's look for a neighborhood pool. The reason why some of these are in writing and some aren't is because what's going to happen is, because they're looking online a lot, they're going to send you stuff and be like, hey, why didn't your link send me this house? I love this house, but it's like, they kind of want to catch you. Like, you didn't send me this one. With this buyer questionnaire, I'm able to be like, let me go look really quickly. And then I'll look at that house and I'll be like, oh, because that one's only 1,600 square feet. You didn't want to start under 1,800. Or you said having a neighborhood pool was really important. This is in a neighborhood that doesn't have a pool. So yeah, I'm not going to show you those houses. However, we can modify your search criteria if you love that house. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh no, that's great. I just didn't realize that. You've kind of made yourself the expert of the area when it really just boils down to you ask the right questions. What page am I on? Oh, okay. I see you answered. All right. Here are some things to add to your questionnaire. Back to the whole school district. I've learned what can be objections for people, or some questions they'll have for me that either you're not allowed to answer, or maybe you just aren't going to, because like I say, you're a real estate agent, you're not a policeman. I went to the local chamber of commerce online, and or now there may be different resources, right? So my point is go to different resources. Go Google Somerville Interactive Map or Chamber of Commerce, Somerville, wherever. Give them police department numbers, police department websites, because what you're doing is you're going ahead and giving them the resources they haven't even told you might be important to them. So when they say, what are the crime stats? You know, first you can't really answer stuff like that. But I also am not a heavy researcher as a person, and I don't ever look up crime. So I don't want to look like an idiot. So what I do now is I say, oh, good news. I've already given you all that you need to do that research. Aren't I so amazing? When in all actuality, I'm like, unfortunately, I don't ever go in that direction. So I didn't even think to know the answer. You're giving them what they need, because you cannot be everything to everybody, but you can create a document that has something for everyone. That's how you become the best agent out there. Local maps, and then links to testimonials. So like if you have been in the business for a little bit, and maybe you've had a couple closings, try to get your testimonials and then give them the links to this, because you want them to see, like, the way I describe it, the buyer questionnaire to me is about the agent and the buyer. It's very personal. It sells me. And I'm going to go in a little bit more detail about some of the different verbiage I have. The guide, the buyer guide, is about what it is to buy a house in South Carolina. I wanted 2 documents where if I met someone and they needed just a low softball, they did not want a real estate agent bugging them, I can offer to send them the steps of buying a house in South Carolina, and it's not like down their throat real estate agent. So they'll be like, okay, great. However, the minute they're like, I'd like to learn more about you or whatever, I have that also. The buyer questionnaire is really steeped in personal stats, testimonials. I just didn't want it to be all about the real estate agent, and I wanted to be just items of value. It's also really useful because if you're doing an 8x8 to like internet leads, you can send these once at a time every week. And like you give them a guide, then you give them your questionnaire. So they're also good items of value for cold leads you're trying to convert. Okay, let's go to page 5. Again, I have struck everything on that page because it's all redundant. And what it boils down to are the 3 things you see that I have circled. How many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, and then what do you currently love or hate in where you live that you want to either repeat or not repeat. That gives all the information you need. Like, again, back to the whole, like, in a perfect world, we would get them everything they want and need, the dream house. I actually steer clear of the words dream house. But what I do say is, let's build what you want, because I've learned, and I bought 1 house as a real estate agent, the house we live in now. And I learned after years of doing this as my job, I was like, wow, I did not expect that that would be one of the things I wanted. Because most of the time when I'm working with clients, I don't filter it through me. I filter it through them. When it finally came time for me to do it, I used my own questionnaire. And I was like, okay, so, and then I would go walk through houses and I was like, yep, I thought I liked this. I don't like this anymore. So it gave me the ability to say to buyers, everything we go over right now is probably half of it's going to change, and that's okay. You have a lot of information coming at you. There are a lot of houses out there, and sometimes you don't really know until you taste, touch, and feel a house. So when I make them answer, what do you currently love or hate that you want to repeat? It makes them come out of like the magazine description and be like, I really hate shag carpeting because I have it. So it's like you get them back into a realistic place. So that whole page became 3 questions for me. All right, next page, 6 of 8. Okay. Everything on that page got struck except the 5 must-haves. And this goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. I have found that literally only 5, this is why we follow Keller Williams, and this is why we go to classes, and that's why I'm still using their documents, because every buyer really only boils down to 5 things. Those 5 things typically always are price, location, bedrooms and baths, a garage, ironically, a garage or no garage. Um, that may be it. Because what I've learned is most people, those are the deal breakers. And it may be like maybe schools or something like that. What most people do is they say, I have to have a fireplace. But then it's like when they find the house that fits everything else, the fireplace is not that big of a deal. Your job is not to tell them, oh, that's not going to matter. It's not going to matter. I know it's not going to matter. Don't be that guy. But when you make them say, okay, give me your 5 must-haves, you then now know your roadmap. And you can also discuss that with them to say, your 5 must-haves are actually pretty good to have in your price point. So I'm going to add the screen porch. I'm actually going to add, I don't know, something. I'll come up with something, maybe a newer year, whatever. So I'll find a way to like try to plus what they've already given me. But you have to get that blueprint first, because you also don't want to be like, oh, they're going to be like 3 houses. You're going to know there may be only 3 houses that are in their price point with their must-haves. And again, that's how you learn to reach into your toolkit and find the script that says things like, Charleston is never going to be a bad place to invest ever again. If this isn't necessarily all the bells and whistles home for you right now, look at it as the start to your investment portfolio. This house, if you stay conservative, and I like staying conservative, Mr. Buyer, I like your low price point because you're going to be under what a lot of the inflated prices are doing. If you can stay under 400 in Charleston, you're golden. You will always be able to rent it and you'll always be able to sell it. You'll never really be upside down unless, and I'll say things like, unless such a catastrophe happens, and that's the least of our worries, right? But I'll be like, if you can stay as conservative as possible, that would also make me happy. And then we'll use that house for the next step. So I have hopeful conversations that aren't promising the world, but I keep them conservative in order to do that. So, and then sometimes I have to say to people, all right, so here's the deal. There's just not a lot you're loving in your price point, and that's okay. Let's do this. Let's start, let's make a plan that over the next year, you just watch the market, but maybe start setting aside $200 extra into a savings account, and then you have a little bit more of a down payment. So even if it's not the right time for them, y'all, it's also up to you to help them self-discover that. That's your job too. So don't be afraid of that. All right, page 7 of 8. All of that we've already covered. That's why it is struck. But I have one final heading. Mike, did you have your hand up just then? Okay. The last heading that's super important to know who and what you're working with is, mine says our relationship. And obviously you see the questions. Have you worked with an agent? Have you bought in South Carolina? What did you like or not like about the process? You don't ask about the agent. Most important thing about our relationship, I should know at the outset. And what have I not asked that I should have? What that does is it lets you read what their experience has been in the past. And now you have, like, I take it as my personal passion. I mean, Joseph and I sat with our, logo, an exceptional experience. We realized that we didn't, our personal passion wasn't opening doors or getting you in there smoothly or whatever. It's more like, I want you to have an exceptional experience because this is a stressful, big transaction. You're letting me walk you through it, which is an honor. So I want you to say it's a tough process, but Lynn and Joseph made it kind of an exceptional, less stressful process. So when I read that they might have had a bad experience or they're a little gun shy or this, that, or the other, that's my personal goal, is to say, well, I'm gonna redeem that for you. I'm gonna make, and so then I will often at that point understand that maybe this is the client. I never tell them what's going on. I pretend that everything's going fine, and then Joseph sometimes calls me the octopus because he was like, you have 8 hands and you keep things together and no one even knows what you're doing. But to me, that's my gift, is to say, you give me your family, I'm going to take care of it. Some people want to know, and you think, yeah, they can handle it. Some cannot handle it. Do not tell them. Just do your job and do it well. Okay. So if you look at page 8 of 8, you'll notice I had the little swirly thing, and I used in my post consult email. Okay. So back to my system. and not wanting to have a really long document, I really loved the verbiage here. And I decided because I found that writing an email following a consultation with all of the details that got it out of my head, got it somewhere in writing, that if in 3 weeks, let's say they go on vacation right after we consult, if I don't get a post consult email to them, I don't know what I just said to them. So that's why I say within 24 hours, get all that stuff out of your head or off your notes, get it to an email to them. Then you can go search all sent items to this client and you can see what you're supposed to be doing and what they're supposed to be doing. And you never have to rely on your humanity, which life can hit you hard and all of a sudden you've consulted and maybe your kid got sick. So anyway, I love the verbiage of page 8, but I moved it into my email and I didn't keep it in the questionnaire because I wanted it to be just not on that document. And if anybody is like, can I spend time with you and talk more about all this, please do. I'm here to be your resource. All right, so that's the buyer questionnaire. The buyer's guide, which we're going to do in a minute, that is a lot fewer edits. This is a lot less talking. This one is a little bit more just set it and forget it. But before we jump over to that one, do we have any questions? Do we have any thoughts? And if you do, let's chat. If not, I'll just run through the buyer guide and explain to you the like 6 edits I made. And then, because what I did too is I took some of the verbiage from the buyer guide and moved it into my emails because I liked it, but the same rule applied. I didn't want like a 32-page buyer guide. So is everyone cool to move forward with that one? We all good? Okay. So let me get to that same document, buyer guide notes. All right. This one's really quick and easy. Same rule applies. Put your brand up there at the top. I kept a guide to buying your home. I think that's pretty easy to understand. So no need to change that. Page 2, that whole document. So here's what I did in my questionnaire. Remember I told y'all I have 4 pages worth or 4-page questionnaire. Ironically, only 2 of those pages are those questions. The other 2 pages are about me. And one of them says, Lily, at the heading, I think it says something like, what does hiring a buyer's agent cost me and what do they do? And I put this information. Basically it says, here's what's important for you, Mr. Buyer, to know. This process is all about you. Here's what it's about. I'm going to work with you. My focus is on your complete satisfaction, blah, blah, blah. And then the second part of that page is the next page where if you jump, says, you get from me. Again, how big does the font have to be? I just decreased the font, got rid of a lot of that spacing. But my page that says, I think it actually says, what does hiring Lynn as my buyer's agent cost me? And what do I get for that? And I have $0, like zeros at the top. And then I have a list of everything I'm doing for them and why it's all about them, blah, blah, blah. I wanted that in my questionnaire. Again, my questionnaire was my way of selling myself. So I moved it off of the guide. Just suggestions. You don't have to do this. But I like the way that, and here's the thing, you should read through it. And if you don't know some of what this is saying you're going to do, then you need to get with an agent, say, what does this mean? Or, anything that we've talked about that you're not really sure on, you don't need to work with buyers until you know the answers. But the good news is once you do know those answers, if you read these bullets, you're like, dang, I do a lot. I need to tell them that. So that's why you do it. Okay. So my technical buyer's guide starts right here on the next page, which is page 4 of 14. This is basically my first page after the title page. Those other 2, remember, just said went to the questionnaire. I just wanted I made notes of look at the size, look at how the margins have come in, make that difference so that page doesn't take up so much space and try to shrink this document. Spacing, not pacing, is what that note is. I liked all of this. I didn't change any of this. I just brought it closer together. Jump down to page 5. Yep, sorry, all I'm seeing I did there was just move everything up and save the spacing. I don't love pages that hang over to the next one. I do my very best to keep everything where every new page starts a whole new concept. That's the OCD in me. That's the organizer in me. So you're going to see on this document, there's a lot of blah, blah, blah continued. I don't have that stuff. First of all, you don't need to tell people it's continuing. They probably know that. Feel like it's a waste of space, but try to keep everything on the same page. And like I even started to manipulate where if one of my headings only had 3 questions, I would then move that up to that smaller space, just some random crazy stuff I do because I'm crazy. Okay, next page, page 6 of 14. I didn't like that paragraph under 1, qualifications for the mortgage. Hold on, let me just double check really quickly that none of y'all are trying to get my attention, because while I'm reviewing this, I can't see the Zoom. Am I good? Okay. If you have questions, type it in the chat right now. I'll come back and read it because I'm minimizing the Zoom so I can read this with you. Somehow I don't have the hard copy in front of me, so I have to do it with y'all. Okay. I did not like putting anything in writing that's basically acting like a loan officer. I just said, lenders are going to ask you about income, taxes, debt, assets, etc. Be prepared to answer the questions. I mean, that's basically all I said, because again, back to, remember I said, we have a team of like 5 or 6 people. This is my way of saying, and here I'm actually going to put, my mouth where my money is. Maybe it's the other way around, but you know what I'm saying, where I'm not going to take on a loan officer's job. I'm going to say the loan officer is going to walk you through this. I'm just telling you that's a step of it. So always keep that in mind. What am I saying that's actually not my expertise? And how can I say, let's bring in the expert for this? Because then you're never on the line for it. You're never liable. All right, keep scrolling down to page 7. The only edit there is you have to add the word attorney, because we are an attorney state, and you see my edits. So what I'll explain to them is there is going to be a title company, but it's kind of under the attorney thing. And in South Carolina, that's why we have attorneys fees, because they're running a couple of different couple of those jobs that in other states you have a line item for the actual title company. That's just not how it is here. Okay, next page, no edits except for attorney. Go to the very bottom of 8 of 14. That word needs to be turned into attorney. Closing 101, next page. I added the word wiring because that's the way they're doing it now, either certified check or wiring. So I just added that. You obviously the check payable to yourself, that's old, and just delete it. Insurance binder and paid receipt, none of that is something a buyer has to bring to closing anymore. That's all being handled well before. So that just needs to come off. That's not the case anymore. Also, Social Security and addresses for the past 10 years. Attorneys are going to get that information, but not in this specific closing moment. So just go ahead and delete it, because you don't want anyone being like, why do you need my social? Why do you blah, blah, blah? Just let the attorney handle that, but delete it from your verbiage that they're going to read. Scroll on down. Again, I didn't like the way this was worded, because it's not always at the end of the closing. It's not always exactly this smooth, right? So what I did is I said, I'm just going to say the deed will be taken and recorded, and this is the attorney's job. That way, if they're like, well, how does it work? And I don't understand. This is what we do in Ohio. I'll say, great questions. I do know that the attorney handles that. I don't know exactly those steps. Let me write them an email. I'll copy you on it, and they'll answer those questions. So again, I'm saying, here's our expert. I'm going to go use him. Okay. On the frequently asked questions, I liked all these questions. I realized that I had a few that I wanted to add, i.e., because the same questions, like what happens with my earnest money. So I have a quick little paragraph of how the earnest money works. I also say, do you know the difference between repair procedure versus due diligence versus as is? All that's on the contract now. So it doesn't hurt if you have something in writing that says, do you know the difference? Even if they forget to talk about it during the consultation, they may just see it and be like, okay, something like that's going to come up. And then you'll have it on the contract, but you might want to have a little bit of an answer, so that you even know what it is. You need to know that you know. And then you just got it right there, because a lot of times clients will ask me over and over and over the same questions. And in their defense, there's a lot coming at them. And I say that to them. If you ask me the same question 3 times, that is totally fine. I do this all day long. You just are not going to remember all this. However, let's say I'm busy and I get an email or a text. It's like, what is about the earnest money again? I can actually say, go find your buyer guide. There's a question and answer on that. So I can actually get the information they need. I'm back working what I need to be working, and they can go self-solve because I've already given them the information. All that applies with school districts. All the resources you give them, if you give it to them ahead of time and they ask for it 3 weeks later, and you're busy and you know that you can't spend time answering questions, you can actually say, I'm so sorry, I'm with a client today, maybe getting a massage. I'm with a client today. However, go find this document, and as soon as I have a minute, I'll call you to make sure you found it and any other questions you have. So a big part of being a buyer's agent is also protecting yourself in your personal life. And I'll take a moment to say this. I definitely address my hours. It's so funny how many people will say to me, I'm gonna come back to the Zoom so I can see y'all. I definitely will have people say to me, real estate agent, I bet you work 24 hours a day. And I'm like, no, actually I don't. And they're like, really? God. And listen, let me be very clear. If your unique value proposition is you can reach me 24 hours a day, then you're making that choice. That's one of your cells. Good for you. I don't say there's nothing wrong with that. If you can sustain that lifestyle, go for it. And that's one of your cells. For me, I will say basically how I kind of run my business is, unless we're negotiating, you're probably not going to hear from me after 5 or 6, and probably not before like 8:30. And I'll say, because at some point, this industry, people can reach out to you, and at some point you just kind of have to say, unless we're negotiating and it's really important, because like I don't want to leave people hanging. So if they're like, I'll like text them at 6, and I'll say I still haven't heard anything back, but if I haven't heard anything by 8, I'll let you know that as well, and then I'm probably going to shut down for the night. I set those expectations. Sorry, you're hearing my dogs. I think someone's coming to the door. Great. Hold on. Sorry, of course I chose to sit upstairs and our dogs are in one of our rooms with a door, so they just heard someone. I say to them, I typically don't work after hours, and I don't typically reach out before early morning, simply because I do try to protect my time with my husband or my family. Like, we don't have kids, but they don't necessarily know that at that time. But I want to set those expectations to make sure they know, versus they just don't start hearing from me 3 weeks after we have a relationship. So I'll say to them, and let's say they're a nurse, let's say they have hours where it's really funky, then I'll say, I'm definitely going to make an exception with you. I want to make sure we communicate. But if they're just a typical person, because everyone thinks you have to be on all the time, I don't buy into that. And I have had an amazing real estate career, and the key is to addressing that texting in the beginning, and to also say, typically like after hours, I'm kind of, chill. And in the beginning, like Joseph kind of held me accountable, because I was a new agent. I was hungry. And I would be like, oh, someone's called and we'd be cooking dinner. And I was like, I can just call them back really quickly. And normally that is the answer, right? It's probably a 2-minute phone call. And Joseph's like, but why would you? Because then you're teaching them what you're going to do. And y'all, that was so hard. But I was like, okay, I'm just going to listen to him. He's been in it longer, and, he's right. And so after a period of time, it became a situation. I realized that the voicemails were, I am so sorry I'm bothering you at this time. You don't have to call me back until tomorrow, but I had some questions. So I realized I did not have to give all of me to keep in a good relationship. And sometimes, like, I'll wake up at 6:30 or 7 and I'll answer a ton of emails and I hit save, 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 save. And I don't hit send until 8:30, or I set it to send at 8:30 because I'm keeping my promise. The minute you deviate from that, they can't help it. They now know. So anyway, why am I telling y'all this? There was a reason I was telling you this. I forgot. Maybe I was just giving you some advice. I think that's it. I was just giving you some advice on, you don't have to work 24 hours a day unless that's your cell, and you're not going to lose your business. But what you absolutely have to do is communicate with them and explain those expectations. And you can even say things like, is that okay? I just have a tendency to put my phone away. In the beginning, when Joseph kept, saying stop, I was like, okay, I'm not comfortable lying. I got much more comfortable lying after some time in my career. No, I'm kidding. But I was like, I don't like saying I didn't know you called if I'm looking at them calling my phone, right? So I'd go put it in the guest room, I'd cut it on mute, and I'd shut the door. And that was hard. But then I would wake up the next morning and realize I could physically, honestly say, I didn't know you called. And I realized nothing is a fire in this industry unless it's like negotiating. The only time I make exceptions is when we're negotiating, because I don't like to leave them hanging. But I will say things like, hey, I still haven't heard anything back from the agent. It looks like we're probably not going to get an answer tonight. I'm going to go ahead and shut down for the night. Any other questions? And I'll reach out to you first thing in the morning. So I'm constantly, Joseph, just ask Joseph, I over communicate, but it's really served me well in my career. And as much as Joseph gives me a hard time, it also really serves very well in our relationship too. People always know where they stand with me. And I think that's so important when you are asking them to trust you with everything. So just some advice. Okay, page 11 of 14. Same thing applies. If you like if you like that verbiage and you want to give some of your about you, I just move that stuff to the buyer questionnaire. Next page, above and beyond. This talks about a vendor list. If you have a separate document, which I do, you can delete this whole page. And I do. I have a 4-page vendor list, everything from dentists to dog grooming. Like, over the years, I just said, well, what did this person ask me a referral? And then I reached out to all those companies, and now they know that I'm their real estate agent and they're on my vendor list. So it gives me a way to ask them for business without being JoJo the salesman. Like, I can say, hey, I've sent you some leads. Where are you? Do you know anyone who might be buying a house? How can I help? It makes me feel more comfortable, right? Come from contribution, and then you maybe can ask for some things. Again, page 13, all that information, if you love it, keep it. If you don't have your own personal stats, use the office stats. And then the final one is what's ahead, a guide to buying your home, right there on that last page. I think it's page 14. I told y'all about my post-consult email. Again, I just cut and paste this out, moved it into my email. Now it may be not as many words in my actual email, but it's this general process or this general message is now part of my post-consult email. It's a pretty substantial email, but it's great. People love it because it's basically like, here's what to expect from now until the end of the closing. And then they always have it. They can just save it, and that's it. Okay, y'all, I'm through. Are y'all about to put your eye out? So now this is the deal. You have homework. I want those 2 documents from you. The ones I scanned into you, I've given you the Google thing. I'm sorry, the Ignite link. If you want to email me separately and say, I still can't do it, I'll figure out how to get it to a PDF, but you could probably as well. Once you've sent me on your own time, once you've sent me your buyer questionnaire and your buyer guide for me to review and approve, I'm then going to share with you all of my emails. But I want you to be the very best you can be, and that is to have this packet. And then anything you need from me, my email and phone number, you have it because I've sent y'all an email. So you have it if you need me. So any ahas, any good stuff you want to share before we wrap up?
I got one.
Sure.
Or more. So the first listing I had was with a guy I played ball with, and I thought that his overbearing attitude was kind of just his joke. It was just kind of how he played around, that he wasn't seriously that type of a person. And I'd started off wrong by answering and responding to just everything that he asked, up until 12 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
to start. And then I found out that by not responding to him immediately, his rant would turn into, okay, never mind, let's do it this way, before I ever said anything. And then
He kind of solved his own problem.
yeah, he worked through it on his own. And then ultimately I got he would just call and complain. Like we had to put the house back on the market because the VA loan was the offer, and the house didn't appraise for what they were willing to spend, except they didn't have the money. And so he says, all right, let's put it back. The next day he had 3 or 4 people that wanted to come see it. He calls me to complain about having to change his whole life around for people to come look at his house and all this. Yeah. And luckily, but unluckily, more luckily, really, I had been to the doctor that morning and found out I had an upper respiratory infection, and he had a pregnant wife. So I was able to say 2 different things. One, that I wasn't going to come around his wife with me being sick,
Right.
or come around his family. And the other was, I'm really not in my best condition right now to respond to any of this, man. And it doesn't so much pertain to what we're doing. I'm sorry, but I got to let you go. And I was sick. I was at the point where I'd rather lay in bed and die than talk to him anyways. And the other aha, which I kind of ahaed on myself with the help of my girlfriend, was the text thing. Was, if anything's important, it needs to be discussed in an email. And if it's longer than 1 or 2 little bubbles, then it needs to be a phone call or an email. Because that back and forth will drive you insane.
Well, and you just need to be careful, because think of how many edits, misspellings and mistakes you make on a text. That's like, if you're explaining people real estate on a text, I mean, you're lazy. Like, pick up the phone and say, like, people will text me and say, let's counter back at blah blah blah, and I'll be like, let's talk through this. You're literally giving me a figure to counter back on a home that you might be obligated to buy. I'm not just going to text about that. I'm not blaming them and saying they're lazy. What I mean is I understand how serious that is. So my job is to help them think and make sure that by the time I hang up the phone, I've said, okay, you're sure about this, versus, because what if they mistyped? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's the smartest thing you can do in the real estate world, is not to rely on text. So good for you.
Yeah. And the quick response part of that was, with this particular guy, is he would say, all right, fine, let's do it at this. And 5 texts later, okay, tell him, yeah, we will do it, but we want to take the refrigerator with us. So,
And that's
yeah.
exhausting, because you're constantly going back and forth. That's where and now if they seem a little put out, I mean, I will say things like, I'm sorry, this is literally, we're literally negotiating your mortgage. So please forgive me if I'm a little bit more of a like old school nerd, and I definitely want to talk to you before.
Yeah.
And that's why you also don't do any negotiating verbally and on email, because you don't really know who you're talking to until you see signatures that went directly to their email. So don't get me started on that soapbox. I've pissed off a lot of agents because they're 80 years old and have done it 100 years, but I'm like, still going to need the signatures. Like, you can be annoyed with me, but this is to protect my client and yours. And I irritate them, but I just don't apologize. I'm like, well, get out of the business.
Yeah.
All right, well,
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. This went really a little bit longer than normal, and I apologize for that, but I hope this was really helpful. Everybody has my phone number and my email. So do your homework, and then I'll send you all my canned emails. And anytime that you're like, hey, would you go over some of this stuff with me one-on-one? I'm always available. I love teaching new buyer agents how to be the very best so you stay in the business. If it's not fun, you're not going to stay in the business. And I want you to be really good. All right, guys. Hope y'all have a great night. And I'm seeing some of the text. Perfect. Yep. Send me your video. The recording, I think, is like released on the Facebook page, but you know what? Reach out to Tiffany. She'll be able to send you that link like this. But yes, send me your homework, Tina, and then I'll help you keep making the absolute best buyer packet. All right, everybody, have a good night.